But thank you, Johnny and UF Uppsala for inviting me. And I have basically free hands to talk about what I want to talk about. And a little bit about my background. I'm a PhD at the Department of Political Science at the University of Copenhagen, and I do research on social media, particularly how citizens use it during elections. But I'm going to present some of my research, but mostly I'm going to present what I think is kind of important to know, and some cool examples that I found as I scroll through my own Facebook feed, etc., and trying to relate it a little bit to the foreign affairs theme. So what we're going to talk about is essentially going to explore the ways that social media is changing how citizens enact democracy, learn how politicians and citizens use social media to further their political agendas, and understand some of the threats social media poses to democracy. That's been in the news quite a lot recently if you've been following, so we're going to pick up on that a little bit. But first, I'm going to throw some charts at you to kind of set the stage as to what is the environment that we're in today. And I think whenever we talk about social media, we're talking about a change in the way that we access and use media. So if we look at media use across the EU, this red line at the top, so this is Eurobarometer data from 2010 to 2016. And the red line in the top is how often once a week do you watch television? 93% of Europeans. And we're talking all ages here. So when we look at social media, down here it's 33%. If we're looking at younger citizens, it'd be a little bit higher, right? So this is for everybody across the EU, all age ranges. You have about 93% watching TV, and that's been consistent for the past 7 years. If we go to the blue line, that's the radio, which is kind of surprising. About 75% of people listen to radio. The internet has seen a little bit of an increase over time, but the written press is down from about 73% to 61%. But the big story we're talking about today is the use of online social networks, right? And you see it goes from 33 to 54%. It's a pretty big jump. Not much here is moving up or down. Social media is going up, written press is going down. So there's a diversity of media that we can consume, and more we're consuming media on social networks. So social media is a new technology, but it's not the only time this has happened, right? Back in the day, print media and radio, there was a revolution when TV came about. And when TV first started, you only had a couple of channels. There was a technological revolution towards cable and satellite, which was the end of the network era. You had so many channels to choose from. Then we had the internet, and then we had social networks. And the point is that over time, with each of these revolutions, you've had more ability to select the media that you would like to consume. So nowadays, you can consume media on social networks, the internet, cable, TV, or print and radio. So there's been a trend towards what we call selective exposure. You are able to select the media that you would like to consume. Now, this is a pretty famous study by a guy named Marcus Pryor back in 2005, and I think the data is from 2004. And he said this is a bad thing, all of these new media sources, because what's going to happen is it's going to create a knowledge gap. So what he did, along the bottom line here, he gave people, I think, 11 different genres of media. So news, sports, reality TV, and he asked people to rank them through 1 through 10. If your favorite was news, you would be here. If your second favorite was news, you would be here, third, fourth, and then if it was last, you disliked news. And what he finds, well, first let me say what's on the y-axis here. He gave people a bunch of tests about their political knowledge. How much do you know about politics? Who's the president? I'm getting ahead of myself. Who's the president? What branch of Congress does this? What makes laws? Like general questions to say, what is your level of political knowledge? And he ranked it on a scale of, I think, 1 to 12. But what this graph shows is that what he called new media was the internet. This is before social networks. So we're starting a little bit early. But if you had no access to cable or the internet, there was no effect on your political knowledge, whether you liked news or you didn't like news. If you had access to both cable TV and the internet, and you liked news, your level of political knowledge was, by his scale, a 10. But if you had cable and the internet, and you disliked news, your political knowledge was 8. So he called this the knowledge gap, which he quantified to about 20%. Why would it be, do you think, that if you dislike news and you have access to cable and the internet, your knowledge would be lower?
Is it right that this no media access is slightly growing with the
slightly growing?
But
yes.
It's very counterintuitive.
Very counterintuitive. You're right. But the fact that we're looking at a difference from about 9 to 9.1 or something. So it does go up, but it's pretty stable. It's pretty stable. Versus this slant. Why do you think it is that if you like news and you have the internet, your political knowledge is higher, versus if you dislike news and you have the internet, your knowledge is 20% lower?
But when you say that you dislike news, what does that mean?
That means that you were given 11 genres of, for example, like I said, news, sports, reality TV. What else would there be? Cooking shows, something like that. And if you said, you rank them, what's your favorite? And if your last option was news, that means you probably don't like news.
Oh.
Right?
You will choose not to consume news?
Exactly. If you have no new media access, you're not using the internet or cable. But if you have access to the internet and you like news, you can get more informed. But if you have access to the internet and you dislike news, you can avoid politics and news altogether. You can watch cooking shows, you can watch sports, you can watch reality TV, and you'll never turn on the news because you don't like it. And you don't have to see it. So he said, Marcus Pryor, this was bad. But this was before social networks. How might social networks change this dynamic? It's a tough question. Yeah.
Now you know only your bubble, you and your friends, and you can be even outside the mainstream of internet.
You can be outside yes, you're right. But still, social networks might have a positive effect on your interest. Why?
Mobilization. Mobilization. Political mobilization.
Political mobilization from your friends? There's another reason. Algorithms. And along what you said, you might avoid news altogether. But if one of your friends likes news and they share it, you're going to be accidentally exposed even if you don't like news. So this model has kind of come under fire because, yes, okay, maybe this is true. I buy this. I think if you don't like news and you have access to the internet, you're not going to read news. But now, instead of being able to select what you see in the social media world, you can be exposed to things that your friends share. Let's say you meet someone in a bar and you friend them. You don't know, maybe that person's a green environmental activist and they're sharing all this stuff that's in your feed that you wouldn't see before. So social media may be having this positive effect on news consumption. And that's interesting because so many people are on social media. This is again Eurobarometer data, and you'll see Sweden, number 2 on the Wired social network scale. This is if you use social networks once a week. And the red is never. So from this line down, by each country is how many people are using social media once a week. It's a lot, but if we look at the difference between ages, 94% of Europeans across the entire EU are accessing social media at least once a week. It's a pretty high number, 94% penetration. And I'm sure if you would go down to 16, 15 years old, it would even be higher, right? And that's even taking into account differences in poor countries, rich countries, everything. Whereas 55 and up, only 1/5. So, okay, we know this, younger people are online, right? But this is a pretty staggering number, I think. So just take that in. What about in Sweden, in terms of news consumption? This is people were asked to rank by age, so 16 to 25, 26 to 35. How important do you think the following media sources are for news? The green line is the internet, and you see young people view the internet as the most important source of national and international news, and it declines as you go older. Whereas TV, daily newspapers and radio go the other way. So it's interesting. Kind of see this change, the generational divide between young people and old people. Okay, so that sets the stage. Done with the charts, most of them. What I want to talk about is how social media can be an amplifier of news. That's one of the ways that I think it's positive for democracy. So there's a lot of people in my field interested in, does social media increase people's engagement with politics? Will they go out and vote because they see things on social media? Probably not. But what research shows is that social media can be a gateway to participation. And I want to show you an example of that, where social media amplifies the reach of news and can later lead people to take action. So I'm assuming everyone's familiar with this photo, right? The drowned, what was it? Was it Turkish? Syrian. Sorry, my God.
Pictures from Turkey, the kid is Syrian.
That's what it is. Yes. Highland Kerdi, right? The Highland Kerdi photo started on a mainstream media source. The photo was published on September 3rd, 2015. In the first 2 hours, it had a little bit less than 500 shares on Twitter from journalists. So what? In the first 12 hours, it had 20 million impressions across all social media. Still. Okay, what does that tell me? This is Twitter data, and this graph shows the mentions of migrants, refugees in blue. Your photo is here. Massive spike, 600,000 mentions. And what this shows is that before this photo, we didn't talk about the refugee crisis. It was the migrant crisis. And you'll see, as this photo became spread through social media, it actually changed public opinion to start discussing refugees versus migrants. What did people search into Google when this message went viral? This is from the United States. Why are people migrating to Europe? What is the European migration crisis? This kind of reminds you of the Brexit, what is the EU, right? So, why are Syrians migrating? So, seeing this photo, having it go viral, got Americans to start Googling and getting interested in the now refugee crisis that was before the migrant crisis. It's kind of interesting. But in terms of how citizens get engaged with politics, let's look at examples from Germany. Where are the refugees coming from? How to volunteer to help migrants. So when you type something into Google, you're typing in what you think. You're searching for information. So Google searches are a good way to get into people's heads. Germans saw this picture and they thought, how can I volunteer? I think that's interesting. So this exposure to a picture on social media and in the mainstream media discourse got people interested in participating and actually helping migrants. Italy. How to adopt a Syrian refugee. How many migrants are there in Italy? I think this is the best one. How to take a migrant from Greece to Germany. This is getting really involved, right? And something about the Pope at the end. So unfortunately, Sweden wasn't included in this study, but I think it's interesting. So the point I want to make is that people will get exposed to things on social media, they'll get informed, and then they go to act. So that's what's called a spillover process, is that first people are exposed to news, whether that's something shared by a friend, as you're saying with Mobilization, or an algorithm pops it up in their feed. Then they go search into Google for more information. They get informed, they start reading about it, and we know from plenty of studies that people who are more informed about politics are more likely to take action. So it's not that social media actually directly gets people to get engaged with politics, but it can start a process that then leads them to action. Okay. That amplification of news can spill over into concrete action. And this action can be protests, even revolutions. So this is a picture from the Arab Spring. This is the classic example, and I'm going to go a little bit through it because I think it's interesting. Everyone knows of the Arab Spring, but actually digging into it a little bit is quite interesting. There's a lot of nuance there. So, are any of you studying social movements, protests, and stuff like that? No? So, back in the day, 60s, 70s, 80s, the theory of how people get together and act was called collective action. And the idea is that organizations, NGOs or nonprofit groups, whatever it is, are necessary to organize people and get them to go out and act. Because people on their own lack the resources to do that. But now, through social media, this whole theory has been changed to something called connective action, because people are connected and it's much easier for them to organize. So if you post a picture on Facebook or you post an event on Facebook saying, hey, I'm going to this protest, to your friends, it helps people to know about that event, and that peer pressure of social networks might get your friends involved to also join the protest. So the best example of that, or the first real big one, was the Tunisian Revolution. And how did that start? So there was a guy, he was a fruit vendor. He was selling fruit. And the government-owned police been harassing him for months. He'd be selling his fruit, and they would come and they would take some of his fruit, and they kept messing with this guy. And one day, they took it too far. And they took some of his money, and they kind of trashed his fruit stand. A couple of activists in Tunisia got on Twitter and started sharing this hashtag and saying this is what's happening in Tunisia. And what's interesting is that this revolution, this hashtag, started on Twitter, but more Tunisians are actually on Facebook. They use Facebook to share videos with their photos and videos. I mean, Twitter is usually for journalists and people who are, in this context, activists. Not your average Tunisian person. That person is on Facebook and is just sharing photos and videos. But while Tunisians were sleeping, this hashtag got picked up by people in the West, and they were like, this is ridiculous. We do not stand for this. So they started tweeting it. Individuals, but also Al Jazeera played a key role here as a media. So what's interesting, and we'll get to this in just a second, but the Tunisian Revolution, one could argue, was started more by Western activists than it was actually the Tunisian people themselves. So what happens? The Ben Ali government, the government in power, they push back through their mass media channels, right? Their state-owned mass media. They start staging these pro-government protests to counter this, saying, look, we have protesters too. And they get a bunch of cars and they're riding down the streets and honking their horns to sort of prop up the government. What happens is that citizens on the ground were able to take their phones and show alternative angles from the protests, not what was being shown on TV. What they were showing from their phone was empty crowds. So the media was showing a lot of people, but they were showing the rest and saying, look, this is fake. They also were able to show that the cars in the parades were rental cars. So it was a pretty clear picture, right? And they also posted videos of police brutality. And in the end of the day, the Ben Ali government was ousted. Protests started sparking up in other Middle Eastern countries based off this example. And this is a picture from someone from Egypt who named their child Facebook. Did y'all hear about this? No? He named his kid Facebook. And just as a side comment, there is a rise in children being named after Instagram filters. Proven science. Lux, movement, Juno, Amaro, 1, 2. So that's just a side comment. But what's interesting is that there were all these mentions of Tunisia on Twitter. It reached 26 million Facebook users. The Tunisian population is only 11 million. So it was an international effort. And it didn't start the revolution, right? The guy burning himself in the square started the revolution. But it enabled it through connective action. People getting together, protesting, sharing videos of violence and saying, hey, we're meeting here, protesting here, spreading the protest around the country. Western media organizations were key in helping that spread. And interestingly, there's this concept called serial activists. There are people who sit on Twitter and they look for protest hashtags. And they just help the protesters coordinate, but they don't, who knows where they are? That's what they like to do, is sit and fight in the name of global human rights. And They use Google Translate to help them understand different languages, or they'll ask their friends in different countries to help them do this. And this has been documented in some studies. I think it's a super interesting phenomenon. These guys were active, so people who are not even in Tunisia, maybe they're in Australia, maybe they're in Bali, who knows? But they are helping the Tunisian protesters, spreading the word and helping them organize. And also, especially in the Egyptian Revolution, local influencers, local celebrities were big in using their Twitter followings to help spread the word. Okay, so that's the whole protest social movement outside of normal politics. That would be illegal, what they were doing, right? It's not within the realm of normal electoral politics. Any type of protest, revolutions especially, are what we call extra-parliamentary. They happen outside of parliament. But what I work on is how citizens use social media during elections. And that's what we're going to look at here. So what can citizens do during elections? Or how can they use social media to help spread their message? They can use social media to campaign. They can share information across their networks. And this is important. So you can like a politician's post, you can comment on a politician's post, but I would argue that sharing is the most valuable for a campaign. Does anybody know why? Why would sharing be the most important social media activity one can do for a politician?
You can start some sort of chain reaction. You share, let's say, video, and then it gets trendy, and then it gets more people to see it, and then like it, share it, and then, basically the harder things you had to do was in the beginning, just to share or post the video. So
Exactly.
Large-scale economy, so to say, it's...
Things going viral,
Yeah, exactly.
right? This is how things go viral. Does anyone else have a different thought? It's the viral aspect, but it's also the friend network aspect. So if you already like a politician's page and they send you a message, that's not as influential as if someone you know shares that, because you know that person, you trust that person, and that peer-to-peer connection. I think that's actually my next point. Yeah. Research shows that contacting by friends on social networks is the most effective form of online persuasion. You can get hit with political messages from politicians all day, but research shows that if your friend sends you a message on Facebook or WhatsApp and starts saying, hey, I think you should vote for this party, you're more willing to be persuaded by that than you are a politician. And so politicians try to harness this power, and citizens use it to help spread their message. So this is an example of some data I've been working on. This is all the US politicians in 2015, so over a year before the actual Trump-Hillary general election. So before the primaries, when everyone was like announcing their candidacy, and this is their number of shares, and this is the median. So it's not the average, but if you don't know box plots, it's basically the average number of shares they got per post. And you'll see who's in the lead. Trump. No surprise there. But for Democrats, it's actually Bernie Sanders, not Hillary Clinton, who's down here, which is kind of interesting. And the difference between the average number of shares is about 4,500. Let's forward to the primaries. I took everyone who dropped out the race. I mean, they didn't have much social media activity anyway. It gets down to 6 people, and then you'll see Trump and Sanders are only 425 apart. So Sanders was either Trump lost a lot of shares per post, or Sanders gained a lot. And I can tell you that Sanders gained a lot. Do you have any idea how he did it? The Connect with Bernie official social media app. And so what this would do is it would send a message every time Bernie Sanders posted something. It would give you an alert on your phone and would say like, share, retweet, post. And what this does is it helps things go viral. It helps get hashtags trending on Twitter. It helps spread messages far and wide. And this is that connective action I'm talking about. It's online connective action, but it's still citizens using mobile technology to support their candidate. As you can see, it was promoted through different online channels, like Facebook. Got some surprises from some people. And if you look at the top hashtags right around Super Tuesday, the big primary election, Feel the Burn, 75, I mean, way ahead of anybody. Making America Great Again is only at 25,000, and Hillary's hashtag, I'm with her, is about 1/3. So this app was super, super useful for the campaign. And that's kind of an interesting idea that Sanders didn't even get the nomination to the Democratic Party. But generally, in the literature, we see that social media benefits insurgent candidates. So, you know, Bernie Sanders was a far left challenge to the Democratic Party, just like Trump was a far right challenge to the Republican Party. And so this is from 2015, just a couple screenshots I took. These are the conservatives. This is like your new Moderaterna in Sweden, and this is UK Independence Party. You guys are familiar with this, right? The guys who started Brexit. So this is from 2015, and you can't really see it maybe, but the Conservatives had 540,000 followers, and UKIP had just about the same, 30,000 less. They both had about 500,000, but then when you look at the vote, Conservatives got 3 times as many as UKIP. So it goes to show that fringe parties are able to use social media to go around mainstream media and build fan bases that doesn't reflect where they actually stand in the country's political system, which is kind of interesting. And also their supporters. So this is from a study I've done. We looked at the top 100 most retweeted accounts from before the British election. And so this was from 1 week. And these are the top active users that were tweeting calls for action. So saying, go vote, go mobilize, do something. And the most active users, I mean, 800 tweets in a week is a lot. And these were not bots, because I messaged them and I talked to them and asked them if they were bots, and they weren't. But all 5 of these users were supporters of either UKIP or the Scottish Nationalist Party. So again, this idea that fringe parties, parties that are not accepted by the mainstream, have very, very active supporters. What about Sweden, since we're here? This is a study from the 2014 elections in Sweden. And here on the left, you have how much the parties got by vote. So large parties, medium parties, small parties. And then you have their Facebook fans. And then whether they were in government or outside of government. Who has the most Facebook fans? Everyone who's not in government. Pretty interesting, right? That really just goes to show you. And I mean, the Feminist Initiative having the most, but being the smallest party. It's interesting. So I went, and again, this is the idea of the underdog benefits from social media, not the top dog. So I went on Instagram a few days ago, and I was just looking to see what do the Instagram followers look like today, to show that this basically works on new media platforms as well, like Instagram. Social Democrats, 6,000, New Moderaterna, 11,000, Sverigedemokraterna, 13,000, Feminist Initiative, 30,000. Pretty crazy. But we see this across Instagram, Snapchat, whatever it is. And speaking of Snapchat, this is also some data I've been doing on the presidential election in the States. And this is kind of cool. So the bars here at the bottom, these are Snapchat stories that I was following. And this is during the Democratic primary from mid-March to July. And these lines, these gray lines, this is the average polling data. So what they were polling at the time. So you see here, Hillary Clinton was polling around 50% most of the election. Bernie Sanders was down here to about 40%. And the question is, when do the candidates take to Snapchat? Snapchat's not a very, it was a new platform in the American election. And what we see is that Bernie Sanders is on Snapchat all the time. He's low in the polls. He has nothing to lose. Where is Hillary Clinton's activity in Snapchat? When she dips below 50%. When she pops up above 50%, that's right here, she stops Snapchatting until she celebrates. So I can't prove this. I cannot prove that that's the reason why she's snapping, but I would guess that it's interesting. When she drops couple percentage points, snaps start going up. And this was all around the New York primaries. So she was campaigning for that and putting it on Snapchat. So this is the same chart I showed you before. And for those familiar with box plots, I've left the outliers out. So this is the kind of like the average of how much they got per post. When we put in the outliers, this is what it looks like. And this gives you an idea of the kind of magnitude that these public posts were reaching. So here we've got, okay, the average of Trump is about, let's say, 5,000. But here you can see posts easily going to 50,000, 100,000. And then Hillary Clinton had one that went to 344,000. Massive amount of people. So if she had 344,000 shares, and you assume the average Facebook user has like 250 friends, I can't do the math off the top of my head, but it's a lot. It's millions. It's millions of people that are seeing this. Does anyone know, or can anyone guess why this one is so much more shares? Double than the second closest one by Trump?
Trump shared it, maybe?
Maybe Trump shared it. Maybe he did. I don't know. I don't know why, actually. It could be they paid to promote it. Or it could be she just asked to share. Which is kind of interesting. I can't explain it. Like, this is such a big outlier. Such a big outlier. Is it because she shared it? Is it because she asked to share it? Is it because she asked to share and also paid to promote it? Is it because it was the day before the New Hampshire primary? I don't know. But it's mind-boggling to me. How she could do that. So politicians use social media in all types of ways. Especially in the States, they use it to fundraise. They use it to micro-target to promote their issues. And I can answer some questions about that in the Q&A. It's a hot topic right now. They use Twitter to influence the media agenda. Does anyone know how they would do that? Starting a hashtag, but specifically to target the media. What they do is they'll release a new promotional video, or they'll release a new statement, and they'll tag a bunch of journalists. They'll just at whoever, so they get the first look. And basically what they're trying to do is, it's a direct line to journalists. They get a message, and they see, oh, this is what Trump is doing. Maybe I should write about it. So that's generally what Twitter is used for politicians, is to try to alert journalists to trends that are happening in their campaign. They collect data and monitor what people are saying about them on social media, and they also use it to control their image by selecting certain photos and not others. And now we're getting to the good stuff, which is the dark side of social media, right? So we all remember this, right? Last night in Sweden. That was bizarre. Anyways, Sweden.se, the Sweden Institutes, you guys are familiar with these accounts?
Yes.
Yeah? So they started a fact-checking campaign. As soon as it happened, they were like, what do we do? You just mentioned Sweden. Like, this is crazy. And they started basically promoting videos to promote fact-checking. Basically saying, Donald Trump, you have your facts wrong. We're going to correct the facts through this online campaign. So they did a live video, and they sent a reporter to Rinkeby to see what it's actually like in a migrant community. And as you can tell, this guy does not conform to the stereotype of the ethnic Swede. And about 1 minute in, I was watching this, and I see this person, Karina Stell. He's not a Swede, and then what is this? HH, I don't know. But I was like, this is odd. Let me see who this person is. It's a troll, no doubt. But what about this troll? No friends. No friends to show. The only thing I could find on this profile is they went to the Institute of, I don't know, Uruguay. What is this? I mean, it's kind of am I right? It's kind of a Swedish name, Karina Stell? Ish.
First name, but not the...
Yeah, exactly, Karina. That's what I think. But I don't know much about Uruguay, but I know it's not Uruguayan. So what is this troll doing? I mean, again, it's weird gibberish. But if you're just watching this live stream and comments are popping up, it's like, playing on ethnic racial lines. That's what trolls do. So that's one troll. But what happens when you have an army of trolls? And I'll tell you what happens. You get foreign intervention into U.S. democracy through Russia's Internet Research Agency. So this has been all over the news recently. They had representatives from Google and Facebook and Twitter had to go testify before the Senate. And they were grilling. I watched it. It was 9 hours long. I watched the whole thing, and they grilled these guys. How did this happen? How could you do this? And what comes out of this is that these troll armies, they weren't necessarily trying to make Trump win. They were trying to sow division and discord in the American public. I'm going to show you some examples of how they did that. So far, basically, Congress pressured Facebook and Twitter and Google to investigate this, tell us what the Russian situation is. So far, which is probably, I would guess, the tip of the iceberg, they found 470 accounts, about $100,000 spent on 3,000 ads, at least on Facebook. And these pages delivered content to about 30 million people, 125 million saw it, and Facebook's quick to say, this is only 0.0004% of the news feed. It's nothing. It's nothing. But I want to show you what they did. And so this is a picture of the guys testifying. And as you can see, senators are pissed. They are not happy about this. So what did they do? Well, they said things like this, which, if you followed the campaign, this looks very much like something the Hillary campaign would post. The same type of font and graphics. And it says, avoid the line, just vote from home. Text Hillary to 59925. You can't vote like that. But what's interesting, I should have put a slide in here that shows this, but the Hillary campaign always had things like text Hillary to get part of the campaign. Like, so you would text her, and then you would get updates from the campaign, kind of like the Bernie Sanders app. So she was actually asking people to do this, but you can't vote by texting. But some people may have. You see this, and look, this guy who's identified as a Russian troll is using the hashtags, I'm with her, go Hillary. So that's voter suppression, which is illegal in the US, but you can't really do anything about it if it's an anonymous account in Russia, right? But what they would do is something very similar to what a politician would do. The first thing, if you start a page on Facebook, is you need to build up a base. Because if you have 500,000 followers, then more people see the content you post for free. You don't have to pay to promote. But initially, that's what they did. And there's this group called the Heart of Texas. And what you can see is they're sponsoring ads, getting people to like. So if you run an ad on Facebook, you can choose, I think it will have animation later, but you can choose what this button is. It can be like page, it can be sign up here, or click for more information. That will lead someone to a different site. So these buttons are a calculated choice. So they were trying to kind of play to people in Texas's sentiment to like this page. So who did they target? They targeted people 18 to 65, pretty much everybody, with the interests of independence and patriotism, and who lived in Texas. So again, this is a way to start building their base, building people to like the page by putting popular images. Don't mess with border control. Texas people would be, yeah, God. Post subtle content. So then what they would do is once they had a bit of a base, they would start posting things like, what nationality are you? Texan. Exactly the answer I give when someone asks me where I'm from. I mean, this is just like, whatever. I'm from Louisiana, which is the state over. Like, I think this is funny. That's cool. Let's keep Texas Texan. Texas pride with their logo, the Heart of Texas. Which, I'll get to in a second, was all about breaking away from the United States. That's what they were trying to do. But they started with these very subtle memes. How to spot the non-Texan in Texas. All right, this is funny. But then you start to see like what they're typing. That's way much easier than it seems. That makes no sense in English. So that's kind of a flag that, you know, what's going on here. And then there's this one, which makes no sense. in love with Texas shape, which is like, I kind of get it. All of these are shaped like Texas, but it's just stupid. Anyways, so that's the kind of stuff they would post. And then they started, this subtle stuff kind of had a purpose. So Sam Houston, who's the city that the person who the city of Houston is named after, just an inspirational quote from a founding father, right? Texas can make it without the U.S., but the U.S. cannot make it without Texas. Sam Houston. But then they created a group to start a protest. Get ready to secede. We're going to do it. We're actually going to protest and pull away from the United States. And look at how they portray the United States. Full of gay people and Muslims. And they're sponsoring this. This is what they want to hit. Who did they target? People who already like the heart of Texas. They want to target that group they've built, and obviously who live in Texas. And they also posted these things on Twitter and also Instagram. So again, like the US are broken, that's wrong grammar. But they started their own hashtag called Texit instead of Brexit. And they tried to basically create a protest to have people organize in the streets and pull away from the United States. Just to stir up, make people divided. That's all they were trying to do. But this one is nuts. So here you have the Heart of Texas page. Texas, homeland of guns, barbecue, and your heart. You are. And then they have the United Muslims of America. Very much the same strategy. Start off with, they would just post like Muslim inspirational quotes that people could identify with and like. And this is actually based off a real organization called the United Muslims of America. That's an NGO based out of California. And I don't think they have a Facebook page, so they kind of took the Facebook page and pretended they were this group. And then they started posting some more controversial stuff. Like, who makes the rules? Why is the Confederate flag a symbol of hate while you have, flags promoting Islamic religion, supposedly a religion of peace, but look at all the terrorists, right? ISIS threatens Texas cities in a recent kill list. This is fake news. I don't think ISIS is targeting Texas. But again, the grammar makes no sense. How do you think maybe that's why terrorists keep targeting disarmed states? And things like and share if you agree that Texas is a Christian state. So starting to play to these religious divisions in the states. And then what they did is they created two events at the same time, at the same place, through these pages. One was an event outside of a newly opened Islamic center to promote and save Islamic knowledge, whereas the Heart of Texas group got Stop the Islamization of Texas, to put them at the same place at the same time. And for $200, they were able to create this, which is a very small event. The picture makes it look a little bit bigger than it is. If this video works, let's see if I can. Yeah, it might not work. It's not that important. There's a video from the protest that it wasn't very big, but still, this was the agenda of what the Russians were trying to do. So you had white supremacists come out for the Heart of Texas side, and then you had just a group of people in defense of this center promoting Islam. And the most interesting part about it is the white supremacists, one of them said, it's weird that no one from Heart of Texas is here. Because they're in St. Petersburg, right? So this was kind of the agenda the Russians were trying to do. And I want to have one more example, which is a group that was called Black Matters. So clearly playing on the Black Lives Matter. And who did they target? People ages 18 to 65 with interests like Martin Luther King, African American Civil Rights Movement, Malcolm X. And the locations, different parts of the US, but including Ferguson, Missouri, where they had massive protests after a black person was shot by a policeman. So pretty vicious stuff. And the point that I want to make is that it was not about electing Trump. So once Trump was elected, they promoted an event, this Black Matters page, to stop Trump, stop racism. And they were going to have a Not My President rally where actually 5,000 to 10,000 people actually showed up in Union Square in New York to protest Trump. But again, no one from Black Matters was there. And so the aim, or what I want to show with this example, is that the aim was not necessarily to elect Trump. As soon as Trump was elected, they just kept doing the same stuff. And surprise, it's also happening in Sweden at the moment. So there's a study that just got released in the Journal of Strategic Studies that looked at this. And what are the Russians doing here? They're trying to sow division about NATO and migration policies about the EU. Again, these same ethnic tensions. And they forged fake documents and letters. And so there was a Swedish Sputnik page, so a Sputnik version of, or Swedish version of Sputnik that was promoting news. It's closed down now, but from about 8 months, 2015, researchers collected all their posts. And so most of them, this pink line, was just random news. So just stuff that was happening in the world. Then they had some clickbait, some, kind of articles that aren't really about anything but grab attention. And then intermixed with this random news is all these things about Western policy failures, negative images of the West, trying to sow division between the West and NATO, and just talking about crises in general. So this is happening at the moment, and really we don't know how to stop it. So that's something that Facebook and Twitter and Google are really under some pressure for at the moment. So to kind of wrap up, in terms of social media's effect on democracy, or how it's changing democracy, it increases citizens' access and exposure to political information through friends, through algorithms. It gives citizens the ability to amplify this information, which can spill over into connective action. It helps citizens promote their candidate, like the Bernie Sanders app. But there is this dark side, so my kind of last message to you is to be critical about what you see on social media, stay informed, and one way to do that is to check out this podcast that I do. It's called Social Media and Politics, and I basically interview different experts and academics and practitioners in working in different areas of social media. And so I have some episodes on Sweden in terms of how Sweden.se responded to Trump's comments. And interestingly, do you guys know Orsson's Revolution? You guys are too far north. So I'm in Copenhagen, and there's a group of local politicians who are protesting the border controls between Sweden and Denmark, who were saying basically that, Copenhagen Airport is our airport, not Arlanda. And the government in Stockholm doesn't understand that they're breaching power from people in Skåne. So that's an interesting case, and they started a Facebook group that became really popular, and they started some protests down in Skåne. So there's all sorts of things. Go ahead and check that out. You can get it on any podcast app. And if you have any ideas for episodes, just tweet me, and I'll try to do something.
Michael, do you have a Facebook page? Or?
Yeah, there's a Facebook page as well. Live streaming this conversation on there right now. So check it out, and then from there there's links to how you can access it. But yeah, so that's it, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. You didn't really mention this idea of filter bubbles, and especially how platforms like Facebook and YouTube creates algorithms because they want the user to stay as long as possible on their site. So they sort of give you what you want to see, and how that might,
So it's interesting. So
the responsibility of those platforms to sort of give subjective or objective.
Right. So there's two things I would say about that. One is you're right in that it's in the interest of these companies to give you what you already want, or what they know you like based on data they have from your platform, from their platform. But they also buy data from other companies to figure out what you like and to give you what you like. And this obviously created a huge panic among researchers and journalists maybe not journalists, but anyways, academics are like, this is terrible. This is going to create filter bubbles. This is going to create polarization in societies. But actually, more and more research is coming out to disprove that. Because people are actually better than you would think at seeking out diverse opinions. And there's two ways that happens. One is that people's friend networks happen to be pretty diverse. So even though you might be friends with a lot of people who share the same opinions, it's pretty rare that everyone you know will have the exact same ideas as you. So yes, you may be recommended articles that the algorithm thinks you like, but there's the friend factor that people do have diverse opinions, and not everyone's on the same page. Now, there's an interesting idea to think about then, where it's kind of up to your offline real life, which we kind of forget about sometimes, at least I do, that there is a life outside of social media. And if you're a person who, let's say, doesn't travel much, or let's say you haven't gone on an Erasmus exchange, and you don't make a diverse network of friends, then you're less likely to get diverse opinions. But if you're a person who does travel for work or whatever, and you have a diverse friend network from different countries, that's a very strong way to stop those algorithmic systems from brainwashing you, basically. But it's kind of up to the individual. So it's like your friends in real life are going to be more or less your Facebook network.
But I mean, like I said, for example, if I take myself as an example, I want to see diverse opinions. Mm-hmm. But Facebook, like I can go with my newsfeed, and even though I have, like sometimes I think, wow, this person never shows up on my feed. Mm-hmm. And it's because Facebook knows which friends, like even though you have a diverse friend group, they're only going to show the ones they think you're going to engage with, because they want social engagement.
Right.
So would you say there's a responsibility from the platform side?
Yes, ideally,
yeah.
But they are private companies, right? And you do sign up for their services. So I would say you're right. At the same time, you also have things like this Bernie Sanders app. Things go viral. And when things go viral, there's a kind of, I don't know, really don't know how Facebook's algorithms work. We know some aspects of it, but let's say the algorithm is recommending you only news you like, but then something goes viral. It wants to keep the viral wave moving. So that would probably get shown into your feed whether you agree with it or not. It's not going to block the viral content. And that's an interesting idea, because if something happens in the world that you should know about, you kind of expect to find it on social media, right? And there's actually some very interesting work being done in my field, which is there's a guy, a researcher at Vienna, who has this theory of news finds me, where people don't even look for news anymore because they feel like it's going to come to me somehow, whether I'm going to get it on my news feed or what have you. And if there is a story that is so being shared so much on the public agenda, it will get to you somehow in your feed, because it's the power of other people liking it is going to trump they're not trying to brainwash you, I think. They are kind of, but they also know, and this is another interesting part to your point, which is people, like, so Facebook wants to give you stuff you like, but it also wants you to comment and to like and engage. And one of the best ways to get people to comment on a post is to give them something they very much disagree with, right? So in that sense, it's in Facebook's interest to promote a ton of Trump news, because people will disagree a lot, you will agree a lot, and that creates a lot of activity. That keeps people on the platform. So that also serves their interest. So it's a very complex issue, the filter bubble or not, but I think more and more that the bubble of the filter bubble is being busted. At least that's what research is starting to show. Or at least people see it. Maybe they don't engage with it, but opinions that you may not agree with do pop into your feed. And think about it when you scroll in your feed. You get a lot of diversity there. Yeah.
How do you think that Facebook can and will counteract like these Russian trolls and stuff?
Well, Facebook's response to everything controversial is to block it. just remove content. And also, when I was watching the Senate hearings, that was very much, we've blocked all these accounts. But they just come back. And Facebook can't really stop. They have some measures where if they see new accounts being created over and over, they can kind of recognize it and stop it. It's also what Twitter does. But that brings into question censorship, right? And there's some interesting research that shows we're looking at radicalized extremists on Twitter, especially in Western Europe. If people who are tweeting about pro-ISIS things and they build up a follower network and Twitter shuts them down, they actually become more likely to flee and go fight in Syria. And it sounds silly, but there is kind of I think what's going on there is people get so frustrated, it's like the last straw, and then they lose their followers, and they're like, okay, like this is just so much oppression, and they actually go. But in terms of what Facebook is actually doing, I mean, it's a big problem for them. They don't want to be regulated. So they're working on ways, but from the hearing that was just a few days ago, both Facebook, Twitter, and Google basically said the investigation is ongoing, we're working on it. So I don't think they have it. That brings into the question, is Facebook actually even in control of these algorithms anymore? Is it so algorithmically driven that they can't control it? I don't know. So they don't know, personally, I think. But they're doubling their teams to do these things. But right now, it's just block, block, block. Any other questions? Yeah.
One way of getting rid of that problem would be to make it mandatory to show some kind of ID when you register an account. Why is that so uncommon? I mean, everywhere on the internet, if you comment on a newspaper article, you never need to show ID in some form. I mean, there are electronic ID forms now.
Yeah. I think we're in the realm of speculation, but I would say it's not good for their business model because people don't want to feel like they have a visible trace. And there's certain platforms like, if you look at Twitter or YouTube, that don't even require, like Facebook has it tries to promote people using their real identity. But it's not linked to anything. I mean, in Sweden, I guess it'd be easy to put your person number on a Facebook account. But I think it's just too much of a liability for them. Imagine if you lose your phone and someone takes it and starts posting a bunch of hate speech, which is punishable in Sweden, right? It's linked to your person number. Then you have
to pay your bills. You can transact like millions of kroners with your ID. So why not make a comment?
Yeah.
I mean, it would erase all hate on the internet because it's just
maybe there's some anti-hacking ideas as well. If someone hacks your Facebook account and they get your person number and then they have all your data in there, so I don't know. It's a good idea. I don't even know how. Whenever I email Facebook about different, they never get back to me. So it's pretty tough to get in touch with them. I've emailed them about silly things like, why is this image not compressed the way I want it to be? It doesn't seem to be on their agenda. But it's a good idea. Actually, I haven't thought about it, and it's interesting that they wouldn't do that. But I don't know. Maybe you should write them a letter. They'll take it. Say you're from Sweden. Yeah. Silicon Valley to Mark Zuckerberg. Yeah.
Well, the problem with that would be that who creates the ID, right? For example, like Russia could create fake ID, and like who would not prove that it is legit or not. So that way it could infiltrate the system.
Yeah.
That's already sorted since you can log into your bank account, and that has to be safe. You can transact millions of kroners.
Yeah, but it's all centralized, so I mean, if it's corrupt, then people can fix it. Like you can check it if it's like the actual book, but if they produce the ID themselves.
I mean, you have these. What is it? You hear all the time about this whatever website got hacked and all these social security numbers and person numbers got stolen and sold. Now they're getting sold on the dark web or something. I mean, maybe that's a liability for them. I don't know.
I have the impression that our law, our like also social system is not ready for this social media. I mean, it evolved for a long time, and without it, now there is a big transformation. And my question is, what do you think we should change? What we should introduce in our law, etc., to adapt to the social media world, like especially in this from the political point of view?
I think definitely more regulation is needed, and there is going into effect in 2018 I forget the exact name. It's
GDPR.
European Union
GDPR, the General Data Protection.
General Data Protection, and there's a clause in there that's the right to
be erased from internet.
Yeah, there's right to be erased, and there's also a right to know why you were, in terms of what you were saying about why you're being shown certain things. But I was just talking with a specialist in algorithms, and he was saying like the level of machine learning that Facebook is doing to predict things, it's very hard to go back and identify why one point in the chain was delivered to someone. So for him, he has no idea actually how Facebook is going to solve this problem. But for me, I think the biggest issue that more could be done on the regulation side is more transparency, basically. We have no idea why what we do influences what we see on Facebook. We don't know what's being shown to us, and those algorithms are being updated all the time. And whenever you get the terms and conditions, they're designed so that you just hit accept, right? Like, it's not in their interest for you to actually know what's going on. So there's more regulation in Europe at the moment, but in the US, like for the campaigns, they are buying credit card information, what you purchased. They're buying data from your utility bills to find out where you live and stuff like that. So they're using all these different sources of data in order to predict who you're more likely to vote for or what issues you're likely to care about. And that, I think, is a problem that, whenever you authorize an app on Facebook, so like Spotify, will you authorize Spotify to use your app? Then they can go in and pull tons of data about you and sell it. And they do. And I don't think that's okay because people don't know about it. So I think the first step is more awareness about how much data about you is out there. But I think you're right in the sense that we've kind of gone so far that it's already out there. Like, even if I go and I close on my accounts, there's still so much data about me. All my Google searches. If you use Gmail, Google reads your Gmail to figure out what you like, what you do, what you buy. And they sell it to advertisers who sell you stuff. So, yeah, the question of regulation is a tough one. But I think the EU is really leading the way on that. And I think the US is watching pretty closely to see what they do. Does that answer? It's not quite a...
I keep asking this question to myself and different people, so it's an open process.
Yeah, and I don't think there really is an answer because there's also one last thing I'll say is that there's some interesting work being done on 2016 elections where, representatives from Facebook and Twitter and Google meet with digital campaigners, and they basically they go out to Silicon Valley and they meet, and these strategists basically tell them, hey, this is what works and this is what doesn't work. And the idea is that these companies want to have good relations with politicians because if they win, then they're in office. And then they can say like, hey, don't regulate us. We put you in office type of thing. And one of the theories behind why Trump won this election is because he didn't have a very big team, right? He didn't know he was going to get the nomination. So whatever Facebook said, he did. Whereas when the campaigners came to Hillary, she had a huge digital team. They're like, no, we'll hear you, but we're going to do our own thing. And so actually, Trump just opened the doors, Trump campaign, to what Facebook and Twitter were saying, and that might have worked in their favor because they just took their advice because they didn't have anyone else to really talk to. Because the people working at these companies are pretty much the best minds out there. So they know what works, and if they give you advice, you should probably take it. Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, you're next.
Thanks. Can you make some comments about the social media in China? And do you think the Western media kind of they're exaggerating the situation of the speech freedom in China, or do you think it's a kind of objective the comments?
Right.
And also, do you have any advice about how to be smart when we're dealing with social media? Yeah.
In China?
Generally.
In terms of
In terms of like so many pieces of news every day, and you're involved in that, and how can you tell whether it's true or it's fake, and do you have any advice how to be smart when you're dealing with this stuff?
Yes. Okay, so first on the question of China, the Great Firewall, which I think is just one of the greatest words of all time. The Great Firewall, there's actually been some really interesting work done out of Harvard on this when social media just started up. So around 2003, 2004, as opposed to the US, where first you had Friendster and then you had Facebook. In China, you had thousands of startup social media companies, or hundreds, something like that. And so researchers are very interested in, because basically the Chinese government has a massive censorship operation to monitor what the conversations are. And so they started testing through different accounts. They were monitoring what got removed and what didn't. And what they found was that criticism of the government is allowed. Almost 100% of the time. What they were blocking is anything that might lead to connective action. So either issues or calls to action like, hey, let's go to this square, block. But if you say the Communist Party is terrible, I hate them, they would let that go. And then what they did is, in a follow-up study, they actually created a bunch of accounts and just tested their idea. And they basically showed perfectly whenever they included a call for action, or if they talked about whoever the dissenting artist, I forget his name. Ai Weiwei, which was a really hot issue at the time, that because that issue might lead to some type of protest, they would block those type of posts. So it's not actually the criticism of the government, it's organizing. And even positive organizing. If someone said, let's go cheer on, this guy won the election, let's go out and celebrate, they would block that because they just don't want people organizing. They want to block any type of organization because that's the type of Arab Spring stuff. They don't want that in China. In terms of how to be safe on social media, I would say the number one thing, in terms of fake news and not fake news, it's an interesting point actually. My mom, last time I was home in the summer, my mom goes to me, she's like, oh my God, did you hear about that helicopter that was shot down over Afghanistan? No, but that's big news because Trump had just increased the amount of troops in Afghanistan. And I was like, I didn't hear about that. Let me check, CNN, and nothing was on there. I was like, let me see the post. It wasn't a fake post. It was just a post in 2015 that someone was sharing later that came back up and was and what's interesting actually is that there's been some really large-scale studies of fake news in the U.S. election. Do you know who shares fake news? It's not correlated to education. It's not correlated to any type of demographic other than age. Old people share fake news. 55 and above share fake news, which makes sense because they're not as literate on social media as younger people. So, but what I would say in terms of being safe is to recognize along the lines of what you were saying, every action you take on social media is being logged, including how long you spend, even if you don't click, your scrolling behavior. So if you like someone's post just to be nice, they're going to show you more of that person. So be very careful and selective. But there's also privacy settings you can go into. So what I've actually done for my newsfeed, and this is totally political science nerd thing, is that I have C-SPAN, which is kind of like your public service. It just shows live streams of what's going on in the Senate, which is the absolute most boring thing you can watch. But I have that see first. So when I log into Facebook, I get C-SPAN, and actually to your other question, there's a Facebook page called What's on Weibo, which is the Chinese Twitter, which is just craziest stuff. Check it out, it's amazing. So I always get C-SPAN and What's on Weibo when they post. But you can go in and you can choose, you can have close friends, you can do quite a lot to customize your Facebook, but people don't really do that. So if you put a bunch of trustworthy news sources at the top, you'll see what they post. That would be my advice. Privacy settings and being realistic about everything you do is being logged.